Huh. That looks a bit ominous. I'm gonna touch it. Hello and welcome back to Gamebox, show we take a look at games of yesteryear. And today we'll be taking a look at a game from the PlayStation 4 era. A game that actually shares a connection with another project from years prior. A game that takes inspiration from the late H.P. Lovecraft. A little game called Moons of Madness. Developed by Rock Pocket Games and published by Funcom, Funcom was founded back in 1993 by, and I apologize for the pronunciation in advance, Eric Glorison, Tyr Nielsen, Andre Bakken, Gauti Godiger, and Olav Morkrid. Boy, that was rough. In the early days, Funcom worked on several titles on various consoles, including the Genesis, Saturn, SNES, Game Boy, Nintendo 64, and PlayStation. So they're pretty well versed in different systems. They also worked on several titles on well-known IPs like Pocahontas, Casper, Nightmare Circus, and Fatal Fury, just to name a few. 1999 marked the release of what Funcom considered their greatest passion project. That would be a game called The Longest Journey, a point-and-click adventure game that was released for Windows, after which they would go on to release Speed Freaks and No Escape. A few years later in 2005, they would release Dreamfall: The Longest Journey. This was a sequel to the original Longest Journey game. Dreamfall was reviewed positively by most. In 2008, Age of Conan was released, an MMO based in the world of Conan. Unfortunately, this would not fare well for the company, as it led to several events, one of which was the departure of Gauti Godiger. Godiger stated he was not happy with certain elements of Age of Conan, and also the loss of approximately 23 million in 2009 due to low player numbers for the MMO. This also led to a reduction of 20% of its staff later that year. So a bad hit, but can they recoup? The short answer? Kind of. The long answer? Well, let's get into that. After the subpar reaction to Age of Conan, it was made free to play in 2010, and in 2012 another MMO by the name of The Secret World was released. This game was set in a modern world full of magic and monsters. To be honest, this was one of the ones I wanted to play, but due to not having a proper computer, I was unable to do so. Unfortunately, once again this new release wasn't able to reach the amount of players that Funcom had hoped for, and this led to another bout of layoffs for the company. 2014 meant more bad news for Funcom, as the Norwegian Economic Crime Unit launched an investigation for suspected infringement on the provisions of the Securities Trading Act that was connected to the launch of The Secret World. In layman's terms, insider trading, which is a big no-no, and this investigation led to a raid on the Oslo offices. This ordeal was remedied by a fine that Funcom had to pay off on a later date. Also in 2014, Funcom announced they had secured an additional 9.7 million Norwegian krone, which equals out to 1.6 million US, for the new project that was LEGO Minifigures Online. And unfortunately, due to failed monetization, the game was shut down the following year. In 2015, two games were released. One was Hide and Shriek, and the other, The Park. The former was a 1v1 multiplayer game where the players were charged with trying to scare their opponent to death in order to win. The latter was a first-person narrative-driven psychological horror game, both of which were smaller in scope compared to Funcom's previous projects. And interestingly enough, both are set in the universe of The Secret World, just like the game we're taking a look at today. This new approach did indeed pay off, as both projects ended up being quite successful. In 2017, Conan Exiles was released into early access, an open-world survival game set in the world of Conan. This ended up being an instant hit, selling 500,000 units in the first month. Later that same year, Secret World's Legends was released, a reworked version of The Secret World that had additional content added. This too would exceed the company's expectations, as it gained a large number of players. In 2018, Conan Exiles received a full release, and once again it became the best-selling game in Funcom's history. Toward the end of that year, Mutant Year Zero was released. This time, Funcom would take a publishing role for this project. Development will be helmed by a company by the name of the Bearded Ladies. They would once again take a publishing role with Conan Unconquered, which was developed by Petroglyph Games. This project was an RTS set in the world of Conan, and finally later in 2019 marked the release of Moons of Madness. This project was Rock Pocket Games' first trek into the realm of video games. Now, one of the inspirations for this project was the writings of one Howard Phillips Lovecraft. Now, I'm actually a fan of his writings, I even got me this bad boy. And for those who are not familiar with his works, he does have the themes of forbidden knowledge or facing beings that are incomprehensible to the human mind that reveal just how small humanity is in the vast scope of the cosmos, as well as a huge dash of racism in some of his works. Most of his works. So, be prepared for that if you choose to dive into his library. With that aside, his influence on media was undeniable, even influencing the works of Clive Barker, Stephen King, Neil Gaiman, and Guillermo del Toro. Beyond movies and writings, his works would go on to inspire tabletop games, as well as video games themselves, some of which would take elements from different stories, while others would try their best to do full-on adaptations of the writer's works. But this is a bit of a downside to these adaptations, at least in terms of video games, as normally a player will be accustomed to facing and defeating any enemies they tend to come across. But in a Lovecraft story, the main characters tend to either go insane from the knowledge of the horror pantheon or end up 6 feet under. So with that in mind, a direct adaptation would not be all that fun to play, but would make a very interesting story experience. But despite what form of media is chosen, if a character is dealing with the looming tentacle-faced beastie, you know it's your boy. Reception for Moons of Madness was a bit in the middle, with both praise and criticism, some complaints being about how it's more of a walking simulator type of game, but was also praised for its horror atmosphere. And with that, let's take a look at today's game.
Oh my god, what was that?
Taking place in a base nestled in the dusty dunes of Mars, players take control of a technician named Shane Newhart. But as things start to get hinky on the base, it's up to Shane to find out what's actually going down and bring said secrets to light.
Hey Declan, why don't you give me your password? I'm just gonna check out your browsing history.
Hard pass.
Moons of Madness is a first-person puzzle game. The player will be roaming around Mars and solving a variety of puzzles. With that being said, for anyone looking for some ball-smashing action while they rip through their enemies with a wide variety of god-killing weapons and fancy martial arts moves, won't be getting that here, as this is mostly what you'll be doing during the duration of the game. This is one of those games where the player has no way to defend themselves, so the only choice is to run. The player can use an item called the Bio Gauge to help with navigation and to help with solving some of the puzzles they will run across. The player will get the read on with numerous documents they'll stumble across on the red planet. But other than that, there isn't really much in the way of gameplay. Simply walk from point A to point B with minor inconveniences in between. As far as bosses, there aren't really any at all. There are some enemy encounters, but as stated before, this is not the type of game where the player is going to be trading blows with any beasties, as the main goal is to unravel the mystery that has been presented. Moons of Madness does look good. The graphics and overall atmosphere was spot on, providing some scares. The sound design does work well for that horror feel. The music was well done as well. The voice work shares this same sentiment, and does add some personality to each character.
I wake up and there's scribbled notes around me. Feels like I haven't slept at all. Alright, I showed you mine, now lay it on me. Dreams, nightmares, fantasies, your deepest, darkest fears. Let's hear it.
Sorry, I just pulled up to the office. I'll have to get back to you on all that.
Suit yourself. The anticipation is killing me.
The only thing of note was that there was some texture pop-in for some of the objects, but I can't show that due to the only time it happened was during the end portion of the game. So, all in all, is this a game you need to go out and play? Yes, but a soft yes. This game is built for the fans of Amnesia and Outlast in mind. Again, this particular game was not about action, it's more story driven, which is reflected by the very linear design of the game. And this was something I didn't mind. Now with that being said, I did have some minor gripes, one of which was the fact that the interactable icons were so prominent, and kinda does take me out of the game. I mean, I get it, they had to make it easy for the player to figure out what they can and cannot fiddle with to avoid them running around mashing buttons. And also, to me the ending of the game was very Now I'm not gonna elaborate cause spoilers. But if you can get jiggy with that, then I say give it a try. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have some science to do. Hey, welcome to the end of the video. I thank you for making it this far. This was an interesting game to go through. Honestly, I had no clue that it was connected to the secret world prior to my research, but that was a pleasant surprise. The next set of games we'll be taking a look at are very special, as they just so happen to change how we all look at video games based on comic book characters. But until then, you know what to do, spread the awesome, and I'll see you next time.